this has probably been a year and a half in the making, maybe even a little bit longer. From our end, we were consistently hearing that the relationships between pastors and associate pastors in the family of parishes model was very different than what the previous model, the model most of you have known for most of your life. And there were glitches that we had not addressed, particularly even in the process of the task force as we journey toward families of parishes. This led us to some conversation about how we at the Diocesan Center could support the priests as they lived out this new model. And in a meeting with Dan Salucci from the Catholic Leadership Institute, that meeting took place probably about a year and a half ago. Dan shared with us that he had helped the Archdiocese of Detroit create a document that they call a covenant, a priest's covenant. And I reached out to the Archdiocese of Detroit, and they were kind enough to share that document with us. I presented that document along with some of the other pieces that are in the package that I will get into a little bit more detail about in a minute. So the KRAs, key responsibility areas, that's what that stands for, role descriptions, and then the document that came from the Archdiocese of Detroit. That was presented to the bishop and the senior leadership team. And it was, the bishop asked that we create a focus group of priests to go over that document and see how it could best suit the needs that we have in the Diocese of London. So this past July, there was a focus group that was put together, and it included myself, Father Eugene, Tanya, and Deacon Paul Bazaire, and the four of us make up the personnel team for the diocese. In addition, there were a number of other priests involved, primarily Father Patrick Beneteau, Father Steve Marsh, Father Daniel Bombardier, and Father Paul Ayuma, to sort of give input from their perspective as pastors and associates. We then kind of went through that document, mostly what the Archdiocese of Detroit calls a covenant. We've changed the name to charter so as not to be confused with the covenant our deacons have. And that document then went through the bishop, the council of priests, and the senior leadership team of the diocese before being presented as it is right now. That's the meat and potatoes of how we got to where we are. Sorry, I'm going to go back. The document itself consists of two sections. The interpersonal, which is really about living arrangements, what the fraternity between the priests and a family of parishes is going to look like, expectations around rectories, budget decisions, and I'll walk through that just really quickly with you in the document. The second part is really about the workings of the and operations within the family, within the work that you have to do in the family of parishes. All right. So what you're seeing here now is the actual document. You can see the document has this lovely picture. I don't know if anybody knows where that was, but that picture was taken during the pastoral study days, the Mass at the pastoral study days at Assumption. And the letter from the bishop explaining the process in the document. And then the way the document is laid out is there are a number of questions. And at the end, at the bottom of each question, there is an answer box that you just type in your answers. This is so... and then you can put in as much text there as you want. It will offset the particular pages, but then the next section will still begin at the top of a page. So it's not going to make it messy in the end. So the first part here goes through things like what will we share? How do we integrate senior priests or retired priests living in residence? What is the expectations around communication? If I hear one thing pretty consistently from priests, pastors, and associates, it's about lack of communication or a misunderstanding of communication. And so I've even, if you notice here, What is each person's preferred method of communication? Sometimes we need to ask the question, because I'm always going to text you or email you first. That's how I prefer to be communicated with. So that's my first instinct. But for some people, I know if I need an answer from Father John Comiskey, I can email him if I want it to get looked after in a day or two. If I need an answer today, I need to call him, because that's his preferred communication. So just being able to know what those things are so that we're communicating with people in the manner that they want to be communicated with. So expectations for living in the rectory, for those living in multiple rectories, budgetary decisions within the household. So if you feel like you need your space repainted, how do you have those conversations? What's the process you need to go through? Those kinds of things. And then when will the charter be reviewed? We're saying at least every 6 months. But again, what happens if a new priest come into the family? We need to review, we'll need to review it at that point. The second part is particular to the operations and responsibilities within the parishes themselves and who needs to do what. And again, this is a piece where we hear often, and the bishop spoke about this in his opening remarks, about a lack of clarity about what each priest in a parish is responsible for. So, and it's tricky, because if it's a lay ecclesial minister, they're an employee, and so we deal with them as an employee. When you're talking about priests in a family of parishes, the relationship is different. And that's why I think, partly because we have priests that, some of you have been pastors, some of you have been Episcopal vicars in the past, and now your role is an associate by choice or by need. And that changes the dynamics. You also have to go home and have dinner with your pastor for the most part. And so the discipline, that might be the wrong word, but the conversations that might happen between a pastor and a lay ecclesial minister don't have the same effect, or have a different effect on the relationship. So having a clear understanding of what everybody's role is and what the expectations are, because really your pastors really need each person on the team to take responsibility for certain things. So this starts off with, like, what are the gifts and interests of each person, and a recognition that you may have a particular passion for something that doesn't fit into the current pastoral plan. But let's talk about when it might be appropriate for that to fit in, or when is the time frame in which we can expect to start honing in on some of those things, because we all need to be able to work out of our passions sometimes, and certainly our gifts. So, like, when would we like to explore new ministries, those kinds of things. Are there any personal limitations that we need to be aware of? Maybe family situations that need to be talked about. What are the gifts of each of the parishes? So it goes through specifics about each of the parishes in the family. Mass times, confessions, some of those, hopefully you've already had some of those conversations, but I had a priest share with me that, an associate, as a young associate, was always the one to do confession on Saturday. And, there was no place for him to, like, say to the pastor, so we're like, when are you going to be doing confessions? So this gives an opportunity to have those kinds of conversations. There's one other piece in here that I want to point out. So relationship with schools, what will that look like? Coverage. So what happens if, somebody's on retreat or annual days off, those kinds of things? How do we cover those things? An emergency plan for illness. So how do we get a hold of each other if something happens? And then what are the expectations if someone's going on a pilgrimage or assisting with an outside ministry? And I was talking to Father Steve Eckert at the beginning of the meeting. He spent the weekend with the Cursillo movement. That means that he had to make arrangements to be covered in his parish for the weekend. So again, those things are all good, and add to the gifts that you have for our diocese. And you need your own studies and retreats and those kinds of things, but having a clear expectation between you and the pastor, what those look like and how coverage can happen is super important. How are you going to collaborate with the rest of the staff on the team? And is there a hierarchy? In some parishes, the team is big enough that there needs to be a bit of a process. So if perhaps, is there an expectation that an associate on the team is responsible or the first stepping stone for individuals on the team to go to before the pastor gets inundated with everything? Pardon me. So, and then finances and budget and pastoral plan. So that is the charter in itself. And the bishop will talk about expectations of when the charter needs to be completed, knowing that the presentation time gets stretched out a little bit. So I think it's a soft expectation, but there is an expectation. So I'll leave that to the bishop for after. There are 4 other pieces in the document itself. So the first is the pastor role description. I'll slide down there. This pastor role description is pretty much set because it comes from what was created by the task force in the process of setting up families of parishes. And it really just hones in on the things that the pastor is responsible for. Does that mean the pastor needs to do every one of these things? No, but they need to make sure they're getting done. So the buck stops with him. And that's what this document says. So it's static and it's kind of unchangeable. The associate pastor role description, however, is simply a template with a bunch of stuff in there that needs to be adjusted in conversation between the pastor and the associate. And the reason is because every associate in every family of parishes is going to have a different set of responsibilities. So it's by nature of the gifts, by nature of the setup of the family of parishes, by nature of, are there language issues or national parishes within your communities within the parish that will have particular needs. So this is to be completed with the pastor with some conversation. The second piece, or the third piece, I guess, here is what we're calling the key responsibility areas. The short term for that is KRAs. This is another document that actually comes from the Catholic Leadership Institute. It was introduced to me by someone from the Archdiocese of Toronto, because they're using it with their lay ministers. And so I often talk to pastors about implementing this as a tool to be used with lay ministers. I think it fits with associate pastors as well. So essentially what you do is identify the key areas of responsibility for each individual. And then from those key areas of responsibility, you determine specific goals, and those goals can be over a specified amount of time. So to give you an example, if somebody on the team is responsible for ministry with family and families with children in the parish, that's the key area of responsibility. The specific goals might be over the next 6 months, you're going to develop a plan for family ministry, which includes 3 social activities, which engage families outside of those we normally see, at-home packages for families to take home, and a family retreat. In addition, goal number 2 would be to recruit and train 4 volunteers to assist with family ministry and involve 3 new families in the activities above. At the end of 6 months, you can sit back and say, okay, look, we started off with 3 activities. We had to cancel 1 because of snow, but we did 2. I actually trained 5 new volunteers, and we only had 1 new family. But so what's the goal for the next 6 months within that context? So it's making sure we're hitting our marks and making sure we're specific. So again, there's clarity about expectations. Sometimes I see a pastor identify, and this next one's a good one. So you're responsible for RCIA. The pastor may have one idea of what that means when he says you're responsible for. The associate or lay ecclesial minister may have an entirely different idea of what that actually means. So clarifying what those specific goals are. So for this one, these might be goals that someone would accomplish over the summer to begin RCIA in September. So recruit and train 3 volunteers to assist with the RCIA process, develop a recruitment program for candidates, including social media posts, bulletin announcements, whatever, and then plan the schedule for the next year. I might even be so specific as to say, plan the schedule and submit it to Father by September so that Father has an idea of what that schedule is going to look like for the new year. So the goals should be follow the SMART goal process, which just means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So we know clearly, and it's interesting to me because people do have a problem creating goals that are very specific. But again, it's a matter of when you look at that goal, can you determine at the end of that time period that you've achieved that goal, or is it ambiguous enough that you can't say, well, we kind of maybe did? Make it specific. All right. So this document itself is just, it's clean and empty, and it can be filled in as needed. And you can use this with other people that you work with, even in terms of volunteers, if you have people that you work with. Pardon me. The last piece is called the decision tree delegation model. And this, along with KRAs, is probably used a lot in the corporate world as well. So some of you may be familiar with it from other work. But this helps us to determine what are the pieces that where decisions can be made without supervision or without consultation or reporting to, like, what are the decisions that need to be made with consultation and with reporting. And I'm gonna talk about the area, and then I'm gonna ask Father John to jump in because he's been gracious enough to create some examples of what these might look like. So a leaf decision is a decision. So it's kind of like if you pluck a leaf off a tree, it's not really going to make any big impact to the tree. So you make the decision, you act on it, you don't have to report it. Father John, what might that look like?
A good example would be that the reader who was assigned to read at a particular mass has not shown up. You pick somebody to replace that person. Period.
Okay.
Simple. Just
Yeah.
done.
So, and again, this is a conversation you might have with the team to say, what do those decisions look like in your family of parishes? The next one up on the tree would be the branch decision. So if you cut off a branch of the tree, it may have an effect on the tree. In a positive or negative way. We have a big tree outside our picture window, and somebody finally suggested to me, because I was complaining because it was really dark in the house when the tree was in full bloom, and she's like, why don't you cut off those bottom branches and then you can see? And I'm like, how brilliant is that? So branch decisions are going to have a bigger effect. So you make the decision, you act on it, and then you report that action daily or weekly or monthly, whatever your reporting system looks like. So Father John?
So you're working with the RCIA team in your parish. Your pastoral minister is the coordinator, and you, on the spur of the moment, decide you are going to, well, you've thought about it perhaps, and you invite someone to be a catechist. So that the person accepts happily, and then you have to go back to the RCIA team and share that and find out what kind of role. You may have been talking to the team about looking for new catechists anyway, so it won't be a big surprise, but you go back to the team to report that and find out what role this catechist can take.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Another thing that came to me when you were talking about that is, and this is often a question I use in an interview process, but like if you're doing a confirmation program and you walk by a table and a volunteer is like spewing things that are not in line with our teachings, that you might have to have a personal conversation with that individual. You don't want to delay that. You're the one that's encountered it. You have the conversation, but you're going to need to report back that conversation has taken place. Trunk decisions have a much more profound effect on the parish. And so the growth of your parish can be affected by these kinds of decisions. So you may make the decision, but you need to consult before you actually take action.
So you've been talking with your parish team about evangelization and about outreach, and you finally come up with 2 good ideas that you want to implement. One would be that you're going to start a new Bible study, organize people to get into Bible study, however that's going to happen. And the other might be that you're going to have a new home visitation program beyond the communion ministers who are taking communion on Sunday, but a more robust home visitation program. Good ideas. You make the decision you want to go ahead, but then you need to go back to your team to talk about how it's going to happen and unfold.
Yeah. Is there space? Are you encroaching on someone else's time? Those kinds of things. Great. And then the final piece is the root decision. So these are anything that has the potential of doing major damage or major improvement, but it's going to be profound. And so these are things that need to be, those decisions need to be discussed and really, technically, I think those are the decisions that the pastor has to rubber stamp before it goes anywhere. So Father John, what might that look like?
So again, I'll go back to the team. So you're working with the baptismal team, baptismal preparation team, and you realize that a volunteer who has been working maybe for 30 years or whatever is just not reaching the people. The method of discussion or lecture, however, it just isn't helping the parents coming for this baptismal preparation. So you need to replace that person. But again, you wouldn't do that without going to the pastor. Or another thing is that you might get an idea that one of the pastoral ministers should have a change in his or her role. Something that you want to add or take away from that person's role. Again, that's a decision that you would have to make with the pastor. A suggestion can come forward from you, and it might be very insightful, but again, it's up to the pastor to work that out.
So again, just the piece here about the goal of this is just about transparency. So everyone on the team understands what their authority level is, and just some clarity so that everybody's on the same page, which I think is super important.